We want to say thank you so much for joining us this morning as we take a look at the African Union turning 20 years, no doubt. It is the continental organization that is set up to uphold the ideals of unity, progress, not forgetting to bring in everyone together to make that continent indeed thrive and look forward to a sustainable development, especially as we are about to take a look at the areas that they have been able to achieve this. Well, today promises to be exciting. More importantly, it promises to be insightful too.
And it definitely does. The African Union coming up from the AU, coming up as something that rose from the vestiges, I think we might say, of the OAU. And the vision of the African Union was that of an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa, driven by its own citizens and representing a dynamic force in the global arena. 20 years later, has the African Union achieved any, maybe all, maybe some, of those very lofty ideals?
So today we'll take a look at three areas.
Yes.
We'll take a look at structure and not forgetting to take a look at politics. At the same time, we'll also take a look at one that is definitely bedeviling the continent, and we are talking of security. It promises to be quite insightful because we'll be having a guest who will join us as we dissect these issues. So if you're tuning in, I want to say thank you once again. Stay tuned because it will be 2 hours or thereabout of insightful communication, more importantly, discussions that will border on these areas. So, Tolu, where do we go to as we begin?
Let's just remind you that you can follow us on social media. We are at News Central TV. Let us know your thoughts on our social media platforms. We're streaming live on YouTube. Join the conversation there. We'll make sure that we get your comments as well. And don't forget that the almighty Twitter is back in Nigeria. So you are in Nigeria and watching us. Make sure that you share your thoughts on the African Union at 20. And we want to hear from you. And when we were talking about bringing up this special broadcast, part of the conversation was, what do people know even about the African Union and its activities? And you'd find more Africans probably know a lot more about the United Nations than they do about the African Union.
That's true. That's true. Also looking at the fact that, just like you rightly mentioned, coming off the back of another organization, and then just recently, 2002, it's 20 years. In the space of 20 years, what has African Union achieved? Especially, and looking at the fact that there have been past presidents, chairmen or chairpersons who have actually taken the helms of affairs for the African Union, what have they been able to put, what policies have actually thrived in the space of 12 years? So these are the things that will also take a look, probably enlighten, of course, our viewers who are joining us this morning.
And so let's get to it, because the African Union definitely is not without its criticism and its detractors. Many say that it's become nothing more than an old boys or maybe an old presidents or old leaders club, and that instead of making sure they move the continent forward, they're protecting themselves. Let's get our guests into the conversation. The first part of this special broadcast will be on structure, politics, and security, looking at a number of areas in terms of addressing Africa's infrastructural challenges, why the development of Africa even matters in terms of infrastructure as well, and solving many of the complicated questions, multi-layered issues that bedevil the continent. So let's introduce our guest to you.
All right, so our first guest who's joining us today happens to be a security analyst, and not forgetting too, happens to be one who has a lot of insight, especially about the African Union. Without further ado, we'd like to invite and also introduce Aliyah Vayez, who joins us this morning. Good morning to you, Aliyah.
Morning. Thank you for having me. I look forward to today's conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Aliyah. And also joining Aliyah is Dr. David Matsanga. He's an African affairs analyst, one who's known to hold no punches. So I'm very sure we're going to go there today when we're getting into the conversations about the African Union. Dr. Matsanga, thank you so much for joining us. Okay, I think you are muted.
Good morning. Good morning, wherever you are across the continent of Africa and the globe watching us on this noble cause of African Union. Good morning.
All right. Thank you so much. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's get straight to it. As we said earlier, the African Union rose up out of the Organization of African Unity. And many people believe that at the point in time the AU came about, it's because the OAU has sort of done its own parts. It had helped Africa with the liberation struggle, and it was now time to change the direction that the unity of the continent was going. So let's start from that context, a bit of the history, looking at it. Was there really a need to transform the OAU into the African Union? Could we not have continued and just made sure that the visions and the missions of the OAU tended to change as the direction of the continent tended to change? Aliyah, let me start with you.
I think it's a very poignant question as we look at the review of kind of what the African Union has achieved and what it's become in the last 20 years. But I think the kind of shift or transition from the OAU to the AU was exceptionally necessary because of what we believe the OAU stood for, which is largely to kind of facilitate the shift from colonialism and various kind of forms of autocracy and indirect rule on the continent to democracy and to liberation across the continent. And I think, having facilitated that, albeit, debatably successfully on the continent, I think the OAU's, either it would have had to kind of completely redefine its aims, or in fact create an entirely new organization, which I think is what they did with the African Union. Despite the fact that there are several kind of its issues, of the issues the OAU tried to address, still present on the continent today. So, for example, foreign intervention, indirect colonial ties in several African countries. I think that the creation of the African Union was incredibly necessary, given that the continent was trying to steer in a new era, if I may, that focused on very specific kind of inward-looking and self-sufficient aims. So whether it would be unity and solidarity, political and socio-economic integration, peace, security, and stability on the continent. Those don't mention anything, having to do with colonialism directly. I do think, there are definite ties and carryovers, positive carryovers between the OAU and the AU. So, of course, the biggest one being facilitating and promoting unity on the continent. But nevertheless, I think the transition was necessary and for the growth of the continent.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much, Aliyah. Taking a look at the backdrop, especially of the OAU. But let's start off first and look at infrastructure, which would be one of our main points as we go into this first hour, so to put it. I'm going to go straight with you, Dr. David Matsanga. Africa, indeed, is a continent that is highly, I'd say, blessed with a lot of resources, and you know it. But let's look at the infrastructural basis of Africa. There has been infrastructural deficit from one point of Africa to the other. What do you think the AU has done in the course of 20 years, especially as we look at AU celebrating 20 years in line with infrastructure?
Thank you very much. I think on this panel, I have been there when both were created. 1963, I was born, I was in school when AU was formed. An Organization of African Unity was formed. Again, in South Africa, when the OAU turned into AU, I was there. But I can tell you there have been a few changes. Some of them negative, completely negative, some of them positive. I think the AU had changed to a positive nature when Muammar Gaddafi was still alive. And this program, we must tell each other the truth, that Muammar Gaddafi encouraged the people to unite. He was looking at the dream of Kwame Nkrumah. When Kwame Nkrumah said, seek ye political unity, then economic unity, infrastructure, which you are talking about, would come automatically. Otherwise, we shall come back to be haunted. And we are being haunted by the same things that Kwame Nkrumah talked about and Gaddafi talked about. So AU changed. We were promised infrastructure. We are promised lots of things, even the passport. I think, don't forget, about 5 or 6 years ago, we are told we shall have an African passport. and all of us filled our forms. I was in category number 4 as one of the Pan-Africans. I filled my forms and all of them photographs were taken. I don't think anybody in Nigeria or anybody in South Africa or anybody in Uganda, apart from President Museveni and the Foreign Minister, who got those passports. The rest of us have not got. Infrastructure is still the obstacle of Africa. And the AU has not done much to create a climate for infrastructure. AU has done much to create a climate for war and conflict. They have been part and parcel of, especially in the last 6 years, of the current AU chairperson, Dr. Mohamed Faki from Chad. We have seen more conflicts on the continent, more military coups coming on the continent than the previous African Union chairperson people. So I am being frank. And if you want to ask me, an African watching me, we have been captured. And I will explain to you later on to say Dr. Mohamed Faki has actually let us down. He has rented us to the French. And I am one of the few people who does not hide. Because at my age, 67, I can go down. If the French don't like me, I'm not bothered. But I want to tell them the truth, that they should now start checking their foreign policy. Why is it that their foreign policy is collapsing in most of their states? Coups. Younger men are coming out of the barracks, going for the democratically elected leaders. How many of us, of the leaders who are going to be removed and killed? The French need to readjust their involvement in African Union affairs. And I'm being frank.
All right, so I want to pick up from there, because some might say it's a structural issue of how the African Union is set up. So let's quickly look at some of the things around the structure. So the African Union has the Assembly, which is composed of heads of state and government, and that's the supreme organ of the Union. You also have the Executive Council, composed of ministers or authorities designated by governments of member states. There's the Commission, the Permanent Representatives Committee, the Peace and Security Council, the Pan-African Parliament, the Courts of Justice, which many Africans will say they hear very, very little from. So, Aliyah, let me come back to you. When you hear David say that the African Union has done more to create a climate of war and conflict under maybe one chairperson, is it just related to the chairperson and his direction, or is it a structural issue that we're seeing play out with how the AU is able to really direct its mission and vision for the African continent?
I think that's an age-old question, to be very honest, and has been asked since, almost the formation of the African Union, simply because, as my fellow panelist has mentioned, arguably solid policy infrastructure, whether it is the African Union, continually coming up with declarations, more committees, more pledges, programs and policies that on paper ask the right questions and target the right things. So I think in that sense, on the paper or theoretical side, I think the African Union has served as a somewhat successful platform in pushing the envelope in raising poignant issues that need to be addressed on the continent, whether it is, for example, this year's theme of the African Union is building resilience in nutrition. Nutrition, as a humanitarian crisis on the continent, is very relevant to the time. However, of course, as analysts, as critical thinkers, we must ask, to what extent has this been successful on the ground, beyond theory, beyond policy, committees, meetings, across the continent? And I think that's where the real kind of debate is, which my fellow colleague mentioned, is that the African Union has now had a long history of setting these really ambitious goals for itself. Since whether it is silencing the guns, for example, ending conflict by 2030, Agenda 2060. These are all, as I mentioned, relevant topics for countries across the African continent, whether you're experiencing civil unrest or war or terrorism or not. However, the African Union on the ground has proven time and time again that it simply does not have the resources political sway to enact these aims, these goals, and policies. And I think there's a number of factors that we need to consider when we think of why, whether it is physical resources and the African Union not having, enough financial backing from various countries, donors, sponsors, to the African Union simply not intervening in times when it has to. I mean, the most recent example I can think of is COVID. The African Union seriously struggled to get any kind of sway in gaining vaccines for various African countries who were struggling for it. So diplomatically, it's not carrying a lot of weight on the international stage, let alone in countries where policies are supposed to be implemented. So I think that's a really good starting point for this conversation, is to say what kind of strength does the AU actually have?
I want to follow up with that, because I'm very happy you mentioned the issue of financing. We've seen the conversations on the international scene concerning how the United Nations is financed, and how many people feel that depending on, of course, with the United States' strength, that they're pulling more of the weight and the influence. But with the AU, what we're finding is that it's currently not financed in a predictable, sustainable, equitable, or even accountable manner. And right now it's dependent on donor funds and things to run its programs and operations. And then what happens? This is also compounded by the fact that more than 40% of the member states are not even paying their yearly contributions to the African Union. So are African countries even invested in the success of the African Union? Aliyah, before we get Dr. David Matsanga to join that conversation there.
I'm so glad you mentioned the state contributions, and I think, only recently has the African Union actually kind of named and shamed almost the countries that have failed to pay their yearly contributions to the organization, because previously it was all anonymous, and you kind of only saw the results of the lack of funding. And I think, another example would be the fact that the African Union's headquarters were funded and built by the Chinese. And on a political level, you've got to ask yourself, well, what are these individual states or member states invested enough in the African Union and its aims, its policies, its committees, to not only financially back the institution and the organization's functioning, but allow it to have the political and diplomatic sway, whether structurally on the continent or on the international arena, that it has ambitiously set out for. And I think on a second level, we can talk about what this message sends to the people of Africa when you have an African continental organization that is supposed to stand for all of these things, like solidarity, like unity, peace, stability. But in actual fact, and I'm glad you mentioned it at the beginning of the show, does the average African know much about the African Union? Does it know that it has a presence in member state countries? Does it know it functions with particular committees dedicated to issues that directly affect average African citizens? And I think the answer is unfortunately no. The majority of Africans do not feel the presence of the African Union in their daily lives. And I think that's a real problem when thinking about how the African Union can truly transform itself into an organization that it claims to be.
Interesting. All right. Let's, David, Dr. David, you want to touch on this?
Yes. I think my sister has brought out quite a number of issues, and these are serious issues that we must consider. First, the structures of AU, as she asked about the structures of AU, they were made to fail. Let's be honest, they were made to fail. Look at a country that overthrows another country, a military coup occurs in a country, and you reprimanded them, but you don't stop the coup. Why can't we put their trigger mechanisms that will tell us that this country is going into chaos? Let's help them to stop a conflict. That is one. Two, look at what is happening in terms of judicial and justice on the continent of Africa. President Uhuru Kenyatta paid $1 million. I was there in the AU. Kenya paid $1 million for the setting up of the African Court of Justice and Human Rights, so that we don't ship our African people, take them to The Hague, take them to Holland for trial. Up to date, this is 5 years, that money has been eaten. I want to be candid on this program. There is corruption in African Union. The disease that has killed Africa everywhere has actually found itself in African Union. I made a report, an investigative report, an intelligence report of investigation of about 60 pages, where jobs were given to women or men. Either they have done their favors with the either partners. And that report was handed over to Kagame, and you can see it on my Pan-African Forum website. 4 reports of intelligence. Corruption has entered African Union. 2, or number 3, look at the situation of where you are a beggar and then you can threaten the person who has given you the money. Can we threaten the people? Can we threaten France? Can we tell France to get out of Africa? Yet France pays almost a quarter or 3/4 of our budget. Can we tell them to get out? For example, can we tell China to get out? The building that we have was built by China. And what we have brought in African Union, and you are talking about structures, we have brought first over the biggest structures, the biggest building, which was given to us free. Then we have now transferred external intelligence structures that have come to Addis Ababa to spy on us. All the external intelligence are fighting the Cold War. America is fighting, is asking, how did China build this house here? Germany has built a building next to that, to the AU. If you go to Addis Ababa, I've been there and I've watched it. The French are inside. And you had all these scandals of telephone tapping our heads of state. Another point that you have to look at are conflicts on the continent of Africa. Look at Libya, for example. African Union lacks structures that it recognizes the government in Libya, in Tripoli. The same African Union went and recognized another government in Benghazi under the chairmanship of Assisi, General Assisi of Egypt, because Egypt was funding General Khalifa Haftar to overthrow the government that the AU had recognized. Is that what you call an African Union? No. This is an African village of confused people. Because you cannot tell me the same African Union recognized the Libyan government in Tripoli, and then the same African Union went and sat together with General Khalifa Haftar in Benghazi, divided Libya, allowed Turkey, allowed France, allowed Russia to enter Libya to divide Libya. Is this the African Union you want? No. Another last point, African Union structure of, you have seen these guys, the Obasanjos. The Obasanjo, they are moving all the time across the continent. He's making dollars. He's not helping African Union. Look at what Obasanjo, the African Union does. It sends observers to Congo to observe elections and the monitors. We pay a lot of money. That's part of our taxpayers' money. We collect in Uganda, in Kenya, in Tanzania, in Ethiopia, everywhere. Then the AU chairperson writes to the African Union and they say, we don't want you to recognize the government of President Tshisekedi. And no African head of state should go for the swearing in. Tell me, the same African Union writing a letter to not to recognize Tshisekedi comes back and gives Tshisekedi, look at that, gives Tshisekedi the chairmanship. And you have sent their monitors who have sat there for a month, spent over $1 million, which could help people in our rural areas to build dispensary, to pump electricity, to take pump water, connect electricity. Why do we waste that money? The last point that we must look at and talk frankly, the African Union, as it is today, unless we rebrand it and reorganize it, it is dead, is captured. It is captured by France. The killing of President of Chad was one of the most worrying things on planet Earth. The rebels who came to kill the president of Chad are based in South Libya, funded by Egypt, funded by France, and the AU chairperson knew these rebels who came and killed President Idris. We have not condemned. We only came and installed the sun, but we left 300 to 3,000 rebels who are holed up in South Libya, supported by Egypt, a very big partner of African Union. Is this African Union you want? No. I have so many examples. The only place where African Union has been successful is AMISOM. Maybe AMISOM. But how many years have we fought the war? How many years have we fought the war in Sudan, in Somalia? Do we have an exit strategy in Somalia? Are we going to fight until God comes back? Why are we fighting in Somalia, killing us? If I wish they allowed us, we Ugandans alone, we have over 1 million soldiers. We Ugandans, including myself, we would have gone to Somalia and removed these terrorists to Indian Ocean. But African Union says, AMISOM, come on, don't do this. Look at what has happened. How many years have we fought in Somalia? So many years. Is this the African Union you want, or you want to change it so that it can bite, so that we stop the coups? There are so many coups, even where you are sitting, there could be one. Anytime, there are so many coups in the Sahara region that are going to take place. All these young men are coming back in the barracks, from the barracks to overthrow us. I'm telling you, it is going to happen. Call me again on this station after 1 year. You will see if there are countries in the Sahara region with the democratically elected governments. They are going to collapse. And Gaddafi told you, Gaddafi, please give me 1 minute. Gaddafi told you that you are killing me, that you are leaving the terrorists. I have been stopping the terrorists from coming to confuse Africa. Are we not there now? Gaddafi, wherever you are, may your soul rest in peace.
Well, you've said a whole lot, Dr. David Matsanga, and would like to touch some of your points, but let me quickly go to Aliyah this time. We're still looking at the structure of the AU before we go into other aspects of it. Now, Dr. David has highlighted that there is corruption, or there seems to be corruption. I mean, allegedly, although you said you've done a report on that, but let me go to you, Aliyah. Aliyah, looking at the fact that the AU, with a structure, internal structure, came up with an agenda 2063, which also had aspirations, numbering from 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth. Also, while coming up with these aspirations, a lot of presidents who actually have mentioned these aspirations seem to have challenges in their own country. Let's look at the chairperson himself. I'm talking about President Antoine Tshisekedi of Congo. Now, Congo is also going through a whole lot. So many are asking, shouldn't these aspirations, like they say, charity starts at home, shouldn't it begin from the chairperson himself, who are blessed with cobalt, copper, name it, but yet they are going through lack of education, hunger, poverty, and so on. So where is the AU in acting to help the presidents who are on board of the AU? And just to sum things up, how can they actually make this effective?
I think think, I think Dr. David also touched on the question of where is the AU, and I think individual member state interests have trumped time and time again continental interest at the AU level, where we see that yes, there are these committees we've mentioned, the executive we've mentioned, the near like cabinet like structure. At the head of the AU with a rotating presidency, but at the same time you've got a selective policy making and selective policy implementation of the AU, where certain things are emphasized over others in certain countries, and you also see you mentioned that the African Union had turned into a sort of old boys club. There's certain things there's certain presidents on the African continent. So for example, President Museveni, nearly 40 years of rule, the AU simply does not have the political clout or the structural clout even to stand against a president like that and kind of dictate the terms of how his country should be run, let alone across the whole continent. And I think, when we talk about what should be done, that's a very challenging question that I think analysts around the world have asked time and time again, suggesting things from fresh blood in the African Union organization to an entire, overhaul of the organization's kind of core aims and ambitions to make them more realistic, to make them more measurable, albeit they are still relevant today. And I think, when you said charity begins at home, we've got to talk about why the African Union is so hesitant to intervene, to speak up. Why will it recognize, as Dr. David mentioned, why will it recognize certain governments and not others? What are the political power plays being happening in those situations? And I think, whether this has got to do with the long-term rule of particular presidents in certain countries, or, foreign interests that Dr. David mentioned as well, foreign interests that are dictating the agenda of the African Union, we've really got to interrogate, well, how much buy-in do Africans have in this organization? Because I think the answer is very little, and that directly correlates to the very low impact of the African Union in member states.
All right, so I want to pick up from there, because in part of the structure, we also have to understand how the AU is set up. So it's always faced criticisms of how it has responded to emerging crisis and even more. But that's also because there is a principle of national sovereignty, basically leading to non-interference that the AU has. And then it also has a subsidiarity as well. And that basically means it allows the regional sort of organizations to take the lead when it comes to some of these issues. And this was really highlighted when former South African President Thabo Mbeki actually asked the AU to intervene in what he called the unconstitutional candidature of Cote d'Ivoire's former President Alassane Ouattara when he was running for a third presidential term in October of 2020. And we saw how that played out. But the chairperson, Musa Faki Mohammed, said that at the end of the day, there are national sovereignty and subsidiarity issues within the AU that make it difficult for it to intervene. So, Leah, let me stick with you right now. Let's look at that regional conversation versus the continental conversation. Is it not yet time for the AU to realize that the way things are being done cannot continue? We need to come to the table, readjust the constitution. It's a constitution. It's made by the countries. It can be amended, and find a way forward so that the AU can do more. But then it comes back to the other question. Do African leaders really want to be called into account by an African Union?
And that's exactly what I was going to say, is that, in order to ask that question at the level of the African Union, you have to have actors who want to ask the question, who are pushing, an answer to the question of whether the African Union, deserves and needs to push, have more power in order to intervene in different countries. And I think the answer is that no one's there to push. There isn't a political willingness strong enough to actually implement, or fight for African Union, strong intervention, whether at a political, economic, social, or security level in member states. And truly, without that political willingness, I think it isn't there. You mentioned the African Union changing its constitutive act about nearly 2 decades ago. intervene in certain internal affairs of member states, but it's, again, time and time again, it's remained reluctant to do so despite ripe circumstances, whether it is humanitarian crisis, whether it is, endemic corruption to the political landscapes of African countries, to, insecurity, rampant insecurity in the form of terrorism or separatist movements or extremism, that have rampaged certain African countries. I think the African Union, it has sent, I won't deny it, sent mediators. We saw your program mentioned observers, of African countries' elections, but I think it's simply not enough, and that's what I think this conversation keeps boiling down to. It's not enough, and it cannot be enough when the situation in the majority of African countries requires or is demanding more. And I think mentioning regional economic communities or regional bodies on the African continent is really important to acknowledge. In saying that, I think at this
All right, so technical glitch there. One thing that makes all these conversations possible, but can also hold us up sometimes.
That's right.
But one of our guests there, Aliyah Avaya, security analyst, Castro Valley, talking about whether African leaders are really ready to be held accountable, and the possibility of changing that constitutive act that really keeps the African Union from interfering directly in sovereign, national, and security issues.
That's right.
Yeah.
Anyway. We'll go for a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk some more, as we will be looking at the infrastructure, most definitely, especially one particular angle that all Africans are interested in. Stay with us. We're looking at African Union at 20.
Africa is rising. Again, we hear our sounds echo on the other side. Afrobeat and Afropop reinvented, hip life brought back to life, new energy infused into Kwaito and Kwela. Africa is balling. Every stroke, every shot, every raise, we find our place at the top. Taking the helm of real power, new hopes for democracies. A breed of entrepreneurial tigers, audacious storytellers, and a promising generation raring to go. Truly, Africa is rising. And this is where the stories that define our continent live.
News Central TV, Africa's #1 storyteller, has come with the best of both worlds. With a combination of news app and live TV, we ensure that you keep track of the latest headlines, breaking news, and in-depth analysis from professional journalists from around the continent. Download the News Central TV app on Android and iOS and get started today. Don't forget to follow us on News Central's social media platforms. News Central, Africa First.
Egypt's positioning in terms of improving the business environment, in making sure the maritime, the ports are modernized, that we have the sound and well-connected railways. We are also moving forward with renewable energy projects, and we'll be exporting some of that energy to our sisters and brothers in Africa. We are all about bonding and a stronger continent, inclusive for all. So this is what we're heading for. We want to see a more prosperous Africa.
Thank you so much for staying with us. This is a special broadcast as we're looking at African Union at 20, and we are also dissecting the prospects. Most importantly, looking at the continental organization, its impact, and don't forget too, it had goals. Has it been able to achieve these goals? 50 years down, that's one of the biggest one, which is what they call the Agenda 2063. Our guest is still here with us. I'm Joe Hansen, and also Tululokpa Balogo is here with me.
And our guest today, Dr. David Matsanga, he's an African affairs analyst who's joining us for this special broadcast. And we also have security analyst Aliyah Vyas. So the conversation has, of course, touched on the constitution and the makeup of the AU, the structure behind it, and whether or not structural issues are stopping this continental body from actually achieving its aims. I want to get more into the infrastructure conversation, because without developing infrastructure, the continent will continue to lag behind in achieving its goals.
That's right. And looking at the infrastructural development now, don't forget that part of the Agenda 2063 also states that the aspirations will see connecting Africa together through border controls and the like, speed trains, not forgetting to economic growth. But let's focus on the fact that infrastructure still remains a big problem in Africa. The African Development Bank, that's AFDB, had estimated that $170 billion is what Africa needs as a continent to be able to achieve its infrastructural deficit. Let me start off with Dr. David, who joins us again. Dr. David, let's look at the fact that water, housing, not forgetting to roads, electricity is still a big problem in sub-Saharan Africa. Of course, Africa as a continent, even here in West Africa, it is still a problem. What has the AU done after its statement that it wants to ensure that everything is sorted out? Let me use that simple terms, that simple English. Everything is solved in the aspect of infrastructure.
Thank you very much, our viewers. Most of these things are on paper. They are very good documents. When you go to the AU, I've been attending all summits of the African heads of state as a special guest of the African Union. For the last 20 years, there is no summit I've missed. There are only 3 summits that I've missed because of the African Union chairperson, Dr. Muhammad Faki from Chad. I've said until he leaves that union is when I'll step again into that building. 2, I have stated very categorically that this is on paper. The rest of these things are just not workable. For example, a Nigerian going to South Africa, you need a bag of documents to prove to South Africa that you are coming to see someone in South Africa or to see Kruger Park in South Africa before you return to Lagos or Abuja or Enugu or Onitsha or Ibadan. You need to carry documents of this nature. That is infrastructure. You need, when we talk about infrastructure, let's not talk only about buildings, about hospitals, about roads. Movement of people is also part of infrastructure. If you build those roads and you have no people moving on them, then you won't have the roads there. They are not necessary. We need the roads. As the roads move, people also need immigration rules. The rules for border crossing, customs, border crossing, trade. They have just signed a treaty of trade. Some countries in Africa have not even ratified the treaty. Nigeria was one of the countries that went back home first to think before it signs. Yet Nigeria has a population of 200 million people who would benefit from, if they signed, all the goods that you got to buy in Dubai can be bought in Kenya, can be bought in Egypt. And you get a lot of money. You can sell your goods also in Kenya, or you can buy the goods from Nigeria. So all these documents are on paper. They are very good documents, very good writings. Africa is not yet very, very good at infrastructure. My sister up there talked about the structure of the constitution. I think you are talking about something My dear, the constitution of AU was made, you die first, then they help you later. Did you know that? Have you ever seen when you have died, then they come to help you? That's what AU is. And the security expert here will tell you, AU comes and condemns a coup. And then some people, you condemn a coup, why don't you stop the coup? We should change the constitution, the framework, that a neighbor is being beaten, and then you say you don't interfere in the neighbor's affairs. Yet people are being killed. We had a dictator in East Africa here called General Idi Amin, whom I stood and went to Bush at that age to fight against. But most of the African heads of state told Nyerere that you don't need to interfere in the affairs of Uganda government. Nyerere said, no, I will interfere. He sent troops across into Uganda to stop Idi Amin from slaughtering us. Some of us are here, are products of Nyerere's liberation. We were there, we took part in the liberation of our country when Nyerere gave us arms to go and fight. But the AU Charter today don't interfere in internal affairs of a sister state. When a sister state is killing people, there are so many instances today in Africa where people are being killed by their own states. And another point about infrastructure. How do you talk about infrastructure when you don't even pay your school fees? Can you blame the headmaster when you have not paid your school fees or university fees? You go to the university and blame the chancellor of the university and say this university is not very good. Some of the African countries have not paid their dues. They are found in arrears of about 20 years. They have never paid since AU was formed. It is on record. These are some of the things I investigated and brought out and handed them to the heads of state. The heads of state are now moving. They will have next month. They have a summit. What is the summit for? How do you go to a summit when the capital of the summit is surrounded by 20 kilometers away from the capital? My sister, the security officer, will tell you, 20 kilometers away from the capital, the rebels are waiting to strike on the capital. We can't solve any problem because of structures. The structures of AU says, until Ethiopia invites you, is when you can save Tigray. Until Uganda invites you, is when you can solve the problems of Uganda. You can't come into my state. So we must change those structures. And I'm sorry to tell you that some of the leaders on the continent don't want those structures touched because they will be the first people to be shown the door. I submit.
Okay. Because when you bring it back to infrastructure and you bring it back to the structure of the AU, what we see is that the lack of electricity, water, roads, information and communications technology reduces national economic growth by 2 percentage points every year on the continent and cuts business productivity by as much as 40%. But there is a program. There are special declarations. Aliyah, you've said that. Dr. David has said that as well. Excuse me. There are beautiful things on paper that make it seem like Africa is in the right direction. So my next question is this. If we were able to dissolve the Organization of African Unity and create the AU, 20 years later, if we're saying that the AU is not doing what we want it to do, is it not a possibility that we dissolve the AU and create what will work for the continent? Aliyah, what do you think?
That's a really, a big question, but I think, again, I will come back to you need people who want to make that change. You need people who want to and willing to do the work of not only dissolution, but also, starting from scratch, creating a, constitution, a set of goals, a set of policies that are not only, relevant to the African continent, but are also, realistic to what, whatever new organization that is created is able to do. And I think there's simply simply is not that group of people, at the head of the AU or in these existing political, committees and structures that we've mentioned throughout, the last half an hour. I don't, and that's where a lot of, analysts or commentators on the situation suggest the need for fresh blood, new blood into the organization, into these policies to really address not only, as Dr. David has said, the policy infrastructure, the constitution, all of these things on paper at the African Union are flawless. You read it and you think, wow, if our continent were to function in this way, we'd be fine. We'd be self-sufficient, dare I say. But it's simply not like that. So it's not necessarily about changing a policy infrastructure. It's about not only defining but really tackling the gap between policy and implementation, which I really think is needed in order for the African Union to have any kind of impact that it claims to have. And I think, a good example of this is as you mentioned, or as Dr. David mentioned, is trade on the continent. We have this African Continental Free Trade Agreement that has been suggested and negotiated for a number of years now. But again, some countries have not ratified it. Therefore, it cannot go into full implementation across the continent. And it further, as you mentioned, has long, far-reaching negative economic effects on several African countries. But here, it's not simply African countries not wanting to ratify it for whatever, political reason. There's there are very specific countries that will not put aside their state interests, for the good of the continent, i.e., the implementation of this African Free Continental Agreement. So, for example, Nigeria is still closed to trade with Benin. Uganda and Rwanda don't trade. Kenya has a number of non-tariff barriers that show no signs of removal anytime soon. So, the African Union, simply has not played its part in stimulating the removal of trade barriers, let alone to a large extent put into practice the Continental Free Trade Agreement. And I think there are a myriad of factors that we need to consider. There is why aren't states willing to take a step back from domestic and state interests to better the continental kind of program that the African Union has for long pushed, albeit only on paper and only in theory. And I think it's simply because the African Union, it's become a placeholder. It's become, simply a show of that we have one. We've ticked a continental box that, perhaps the European Union has set as a standard for us. And to be honest, when we talk about why the African Union's constitution and policies and its paper-based achievements are so good is because the European Union did a lot of the groundwork for them. We copy pasted a lot of what the European Union or the EU member states had done 20, 30 years ago. But what is the initiative coming out of African countries itself at a continental level? And I think the answer is very little.
Well, take a look at it like Dr. David has said, and you have also said earlier, it really looks beautiful on paper. Let me just reel this out for you quickly. It says part of the aspirations is the implementation of the Grand Inga Dam project. We also have the integrated high-speed train network. And the one that also sounds very interesting to me and exciting is the single African air transport market, which of course would link inter-regional connectivity, and then there will be unified air. But I just want to ask this last question quickly to Dr. David, hopefully before time, if you could also touch on it. Now, we also should recognize that some of these African countries also belong to regional blocs. For instance, we have about 8 regional blocs. You've got ECOWAS, you have SADC, you also have IGAD, EAC, and they're recognized by the African Union. So, isn't it too much to ask for when you have countries that belong to different regional blocs and yet is still part of the African Union, and yet they're not able to attain this goal of infrastructure?
So it was very clear in South Africa when we changed to African Union. Some countries said that they made progress. East African Community, for example, had made progress. Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, we had made progress. There was quite a lot of progress in the East African Community, but still, as my sister said, there are barriers. There are barriers to customs, there are barriers to immigration. For example, a Kenyan can go to Rwanda and work without a work permit. A Rwandese, a Ugandan can come to Kenya to work without a work permit. Kenyans can go to Uganda work without work permit, except if you're an expert. Some of these regional bodies have worked so well. ECOWAS on security, you have seen it sends troops to make sure that the troops in Gambia, Mr. Yahya is out. They have done very well. But the point we have here is this. There were two groups. There are two groups. And I don't want to miss this point. There are two groups now in the African Union. The French-speaking countries and the English-speaking countries. I'm telling you, any motion that you bring, which is very good, the French-speaking countries are more than the English-speaking countries in the African Union. And they go and gang up against a good motion, a good person. You saw a few days ago, a few weeks ago last year, MPs from the African Parliament were beating each other in Parliament. You saw in South Africa. I think my sister will tell you there was a fight between the French and the English-speaking people who wanted to take the African Union Parliament leadership. There are too many problems. The regional bodies have tried. ECOWAS has SADC is a good example of how a union can be run. SADC takes decisions. If you have violated rules of democracy in SADC, you don't come and sit on their table. That one, I give them a tip. East Africa, on democracy, we have failed. ECOWAS has also rules on terms if you overthrow a government, you don't sit on our table. That is very good. IGAD is two-faced dog. It can't bite. It only accelerates problems. Okay. Let me tell you, you talked of the dams. As I finish, you talked of the dams. Those dams are for money making. My brother and sister, who are our hosts today, I want you to take this home. All those projects of AU are for money making. There are some experts you find with Russia bags on the running around the airplanes. Those are the people taking the money more than the projects themselves. You find a man who has done research on the dam for almost 2 years, going to the African Union. That's why, for me, I cannot spend my time wasting my time doing a research when there is corruption involved. I hate corruption, and I don't want to see. There is a lot of what Africa can do. That Africa must rebrand. The AU has lost its meaning. I don't think it is worth calling African Union. It is African disunity. I don't see it united at all. For me, I speak as an editor in the Mafia clan, one
and intentional and deliberate actions are taken.
I want to say thank you so much for being part of the first hour of this broadcast. Thank you, Dr. David Matsanga, African Affairs Analyst. We always look forward to having you when we have these very serious discussions concerning the African continent. I want to say thank you so much, security experts as well, Aliyah Vayez, security expert, and of course not forgetting to Castor Valley. I think we omitted that at the beginning. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us for this hour.
Thank you.
And the conversation will continue right after this. We're looking at the African Union at 20, the new organization that rose from the vestiges of the Organization of African Unity 20 years ago. You're watching News Central. This is a special broadcast. We're not done yet. We're going to take a quick time out. When we come back, the conversation heads to probably the most important area for the African Union, and that is security. In recent months, we've seen a number of coups back on the continent, and many people are asking, are Africans on their own, or can the African Union step up to the plate? The conversation continues after this.
Life brought back to life, new energy infused into Kwaito and Kwela. Africa is balling. Every stroke, every shot, every race, we find our place at the top. Taking the helm of real power, new hopes for democracies. A breed of entrepreneurial tigers, audacious storytellers, and a promising generation raring to go. Truly, Africa is rising. And this is where the stories that define our continent live.
We are not contributing to
In today's world of mass media and conveniently glossed over misinformation, if you don't ask a Cameroonian her name, you can't tell her story. When you watch people without homes deported on the news, they are called migrants because that sounds reasonable. It is even harder to deconstruct all the terrifying stories that we hear about Africa. A monumental name change is taking place, and that has completely transformed the way news will be told on the African continent. It is our Afro-optimist narrative that needs to be heard, a story that needs to be told. For years, we tried to break the dark continent barrier. While international media bask in wide media coverage, they lag behind in having a perfect record of matters of diversity on the African continent. Personal touches are important, and that's where News Central Now comes in daily with newscasts demonstrating that Africa is the single most important factor.
My name is Nadia Nakai, and I'm a rapper that originates from South Africa.
My name is Elifa Julio. Recently together with the B2C soldiers, come on the boys from Uganda.
Alors je souhaite bonne année.
We are Tara and Bella.
My name is Loco.
Shout out News Central.
À la chaîne News Central.
News Central, Africa first.
Africa first.
Keep watching New Central Africa First.
I am Tope Tadila. I am an actor.
I'm Mohamed Sheikho. I'm a writer.
I'm an author, researcher.
Nadia Korafor, and I'm a writer.
I'm a linguist and a writer.
Mona Al-Tahawi. I'm an Egyptian-American feminist author, revolutionary, and activist.
Onias Lomfeld. I'm a spoken word artist.
Tanya Evanson. I'm a poet, performer, producer, arts educator, and director of the BAM Center Spoken Word Program.
To be young, I need Africa, and I am a Jamaican-born and raised dub poet.
Keep watching News Central TV.
News Central.
News Central TV.
News Central.
Keep watching News Central TV. Africa first. Africa first. Africa first. Africa first.
Africa first.
This is the beginning of a movement, a time that marks a turning point in African broadcasting. We refuse to be held back. We are taking our stories and sharing them in our voices. The world will hear Africa's true voice and follow her authentic story. Join us right here on News Central TV as we make history by telling stories that put Africa first. News Central TV, Africa's #1 storyteller, has come with the best of both worlds. With a combination of news app and live TV, we ensure that you keep track of the latest headlines, breaking news, and in-depth analysis from professional journalists from around the continent. Download the News Central TV app on Android and iOS and get started today. Don't forget to follow us on News Central's social media platforms. News Central, Africa first.
Hi guys, my name is Folu Storms. You're watching News Central TV.
My name is Aina Davis and you're watching News Central Television.
Hello, I'm Mona Taha. You're watching News Central.
Hi, my name is Patrick Dante, okay? And you're watching News Central.
Bonjour, je suis Delphine Lopez et vous regardez News Central.
Hi, my name is Nkesi.
Hi, my name is Cynthia.
And you're watching News Central.
Africa first.
Africa first.
Africa first.
Africa first.
Africa first.
Nadia Nakai, and I'm a rapper that originates from South Africa.
Yo, my name is Oliver Julio. Listen together with the B2C soldiers, Kampala boys from Uganda.
Alors je souhaite bonne année.
We are Tara and Bella.
My name is Loco.
Shout out News Central.
À la chaîne News Central.
News Central, Africa first.
Africa first.
Keep watching News Central Africa first.
Africa is rising. Again, we hear our sounds echo on the other side. Afrobeat and Afropop reinvented, hip life brought back to life, new energy infused into Kwaito and Kwela. Africa is balling. Every stroke, every shot, every raise, we find our place at the top. Taking the helm of real power, new hopes for democracies. A breed of entrepreneurial tigers, audacious storytellers, and a promising generation raring to go. Truly, Africa is rising. And this is where the stories that define our continent live.
You're watching this special News Central broadcast commemorating 20 years of the African Union. If you joined us from the beginning at 9 a.m. West African time, we say a very big thank you. And if you're just joining us now, welcome to the conversations. Don't forget to follow us on social media at News Central TV. And of course, watch us live on numerous platforms and share your thoughts on the African Union, its past, its present, and its future. My name is Solulokwe Adeleru Balogun.
And my name is Joe Hansen. Thank you once again for staying with us. Now we will be going into the second half of this commemoration of the African Union at 20. And our guest is in. We'll be talking with founder Surprise Tropical, Benedict Mundele Kuvuna. She joins us here this very beautiful morning. Good morning to you. Bonjour, Benedict.
Good morning. Bonjour.
It's me, I'll say a caro. Thank you very much. So that's a greeting from us here in Yoruba side of Nigeria. But Benedict, thank you so much for joining us and welcome. So looking at the AU, I know that there is this summit coming up in February where African heads of states and governments will sit down and they're supposed to review the activities of the African Union and look at the things that the Union can do better. But we know in most regards, we're going to end up hearing several pats on the back that the leaders will give themselves for doing things that many Africans are not even sure they're doing. So coming off of the conversation we had the hour before you, are Africans really on their own when it comes to the African Union's activities? The Union has 14 objectives. Many Africans don't even know what the African Union is doing. So are Africans really on their own?
I think there is a gap between the communications and the people who are the young Africans. And then I think because before people to own it, they need to know about it. There is this gap of communication that we need to have to find a solution so that we can be aware about those objectives, so people can own those objectives and start working about those objectives.
I think I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit here, Benedict. Tell me, what do you know of the African Union? What do you know of their activities? What do you know of their attempts to better the continent? Because when we started this conversation, we did make mention of the fact that many Africans probably know more about the activities of the United Nations, of even NATO, than they do of the African Union. Do you think that's a right assumption?
Yeah, this is very true. Because around me, there is a lot of young people. They are many aware about any other organization, but they are not very aware about African Union. And this is the communication side. Like on my side, the things I know about African Union, it's where people where we found solution about everything regarding African nations, where all nations come together and find solution for things that are happening around Africa. And then those resolutions, they need to have more platform where we can be aware about it, and then we can start to own those objectives and start everyone in his side how to find solution, how to build on that, how to find a way to work on it.
Very interesting. Now, let's also look at this, Benedict, looking at the aspect of young Africans who are indeed interested in seeing the growth of Africa, and not forget to the aspirations that the AU has indeed mentioned that they want to achieve. So many of them that we've reeled out in the first hour. But let's look at the fact that as a young African as well, and looking at the African Union, do you think the African Union is doing enough for young Africans?
I think the good things about African Union for young Africans, because first of all, it helps us to connect with other nations. like because there is a lot of goals that, a lot of objectives that we share between many nations. And then for young Africans, they make them feel proud to be an African, and then it helps to connect between other nations. And then for young people, for them to be more involved on that, as I was saying, we need to create collaboration between different nations. I just give an example of Youth Connect. When you are in Youth Connect, you can connect with other nations, you can be in contact with all other nations. And those activities that African Union organize with young people, it make young people to feel more proud to be Africans, it make them connect with other nations as well. And then this collaboration can create many collaboration between nations, many projects that we can build. Like on my side, I work with many people around Africa. I have friends in South Africa. I don't know any country where I go I don't have connection because of those platforms where we connect, where we can celebrate our journey, we can talk about our projects, our objective. And I think this is the way to go for African Union, because they can put together those young people, and then together they can collaborate and work on many objectives.
All right, so let's bring Dr. David Matsanga back into the conversation. African Affairs Analyst so graciously agreed to join us for this second part of the conversation. Dr. David, you've heard what Benedict has said, and I want to take us back to excuse me, the vision of Agenda 2063 and highlight some specific aspirations that actually talk to this idea of young people. So one of the aspirations, let's see, it's aspiration number 4, and it says a peaceful and secure Africa. By 2063, Africa will emerge as a peaceful and secure continent, a conflict-free continent. We've seen the coups, we've seen the insecurity, and we've seen young Africans actually taking part. We also have aspiration number 5, an Africa with a strong cultural identity, common heritage, values, and ethics. We are still seeing xenophobic attacks and encounters across the continent involving young people. Aspiration 6, an Africa whose development is people-driven, relying on the potential of African people, especially its women and youth, and caring for children. And let me finally highlight this one, aspiration 3. An Africa of good governance, democracy, respect for human rights, justice, and the rule of law. Again, back to the coups, back to the insecurity, back to the youngest continent in the world, and also the continent that has some of the oldest leaders in the world. When you see this Vision 2063 and how it can speak to an aspirational Africa that is embracing its youth, but then we see the reality on the ground, where are we missing our steps, especially as it comes to the African Union and bringing Africa's young people to the table?
Thank you very much again. I think we have let down the youth. Let's accept, let's agree that African Union and we elders of this continent, we have let down the youth. Our younger generation, like Benedict Kuvona from DRC Congo and others, on the number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, that is human rights, conflict-free zone, culture, and then people-driven. I think, as I've said in the first place, in the first part of this show, they are on paper, but they are not in practical terms. Show me why why people in South Africa hate Nigerians. Why do they ban black people? Black to black. Xenophobia. Why the South African government troops are watching, police is watching. A Nigerian is put on fire. The Somali is put on fire. The Mozambican, the Kenyan, the only people they don't touch in South Africa are Ugandans, my country, because for us, they claim we are very good people with them. We gave them a liberation front. The rest, they hate everybody. They hate Nigerians. They hate Cameroonians. So agenda number 4, number 5 of culture for 63, it has failed. Agenda number 3 of human rights, it has failed. So many countries in Africa, look at what they did in Tigray. Ethiopian troops and Eritrean troops went and killed the people. Did they kill the people in Tigray? Human Rights Watch and other organizations and the other African human rights groups, they have condemned the killings that took place in Ethiopia, for example. Look at that. The youth have been betrayed. We have betrayed our youth. We have not put in enough energy. When the younger lady talked about that when he goes to South Africa, he connects, or when you connect, you are connecting on internet, on Twitter, but you are not connecting in blood. Because South Africans, when they realize you are from Congo, Congolese, they will chase you out of your building the following morning. So Africa has not integrated, has not come back to the terms of where we shall have no xenophobia, where we shall have no killings of other Africans. We have not yet come to that level. Number 4-point conflict-free zone. I think it is on paper. In summary, my sister, these things are on paper. We have let down the younger generation, the younger lady who is from Democratic Republic of Congo. In Congo itself, before there are people in Congo from one side of Congo who don't know any other part of Congo. I believe she's from Kinshasa, the capital city. But there are people in Ngoma who have never gone to DRC Congo because there is no infrastructure. The AU plays lip service, yet Congo could serve AU. Congo could serve the entire Africa. People we harnessed, we put our resources into Democratic Republic of Congo, built up roads, build up infrastructure, schools, dispensaries. The whole Congo, one Congo would serve the entire Africa. But we have not. Instead, we have created Congo as a battlefield of rebel groups. You see, we are talking about security in this section and the youth. Most of the youths have been recruited into rebel groups. Congo alone, Democratic Republic of Congo, has got 146 rebel groups mining, exporting diamonds, gold for Western countries. That's why the war cannot end. The war cannot end in Congo because each country in Europe has got its rebel force, supplying them arms, giving them money, logistics to buy guns. So we have a problem on the African continent. Agenda 63 was a mirage.
All right, let me go straight to Benedict, since we have her here, and being there in Kinshasa, of course, I think it's very important that we hear from the horse's mouth. First of all, how the Congolese, say the indigents, feel knowing that the president is also a member of the AU at some point, and yet the trickling effects of what the AU stands for was not seen, especially in that particular country, your country. So are there petitions that have been made? Obviously, yes, they have. But the question is, how are the youths taking it? That they did have a representative who happened to be a president of your country, and yet there still were so many problems.
Before I answer this question, I want to come back what the professor say. I think there is one thing that is very important so we can reduce the insecurity is creating those infrastructure that someone can live like, I'll give this example from Kinshasa, from DRC. When I am in Kinshasa, there are many people who are in Kinshasa, they've never been in East Africa. There are many people who are in East Africa, they've never been here in Kinshasa. It's like you are a daughter and then you have many aunties. Because for you, you have been in many aunties' house, you become creating those relationships with those auntie and brothers and sisters because you had an opportunity to meet with them, spend time with them. I think it's the same time with Africa. Because we are able to go in many countries, we are starting to develop that love with those different countries. And then this infrastructure that someone can leave Kinshasa and go to Angola, or leave Angola to go to Namibia, it creates that love, because you can know this, you can understand different culture, you can understand different country, and then you start loving those people. And then I think this is a way also to reduce insecurity. And I really agree, this infrastructure types that can resolve the insecurity part. And regarding the petition, there are many petitions that young people create. Here in DRC, there are many structures that are connected with AU. There are many young people who have those organizations that they work directly with the AU, and they create those petitions. There is even one they call La Table Ronde, the round table, where when you have a petition, you can go and then you can create, you can give your petition, and then they help to bring to the president. And it's a way to go. I know there is a lack of communication, that's still a huge problem, but the way to go, that they create a platform where young people can give their petition, they give the challenge, and then this is a way to go.
All right, Dr. David, I want us to get back to this security conversation, because it affects so many young Africans. There are a number of conflicts across the continent now that have displaced people from their homes. And of course, we know that the issue of climate change, with the desertification happening from the Sahara into the Sahel, is also causing conflicts. We have pastoralist and herder conflicts across the continent. But earlier on, you said that the AU has done very little to create a climate of peace and security, but rather the AU has created a climate of war and conflict. Why would you have the AU bear so much responsibility, possibly, for some of the insecurity and the conflicts that we're seeing across the continent?
Because of double standards. They have double standards. I gave you an example, very good example. And before I jump to that, my sister Benedict knows, Kavuna knows that there are people in Congo who still think Mobutu is the president. I am telling you in the name of God. They think President Mobutu is still the president. Yet Congo has voted 4 presidents in the middle. Kabila number 2, Tshisekedi. Now they think Mobutu is still the president. And these are the Congolese near my border, up this way, in the forest. There are people in Congo who have never voted. They didn't vote. They don't know who is there. Because when the voting started, they said there is Ebola. African leaders have tactics of winning elections. They said there is Ebola in that area, so there is no voting. 2 million people in the DRC Congo. You see, before I leave this issue of Congo, Congo has more money than France. But Congo was begging $2.8 billion to run an election. So if you fail in an election, France will come and say, give us our money. We gave you money. That's why we want you to elect so and so. Coming to the question of security and the younger people, let me tell you, my hosts, that the bulk of the armies that we have today are the youth. The militias, the recruitment, the radicalization, like in Boko Haram in Nigeria, for example, the northern parts of Nigeria, Maiduguri areas. Those areas of Maiduguri, I can draw you the map of Nigeria even when I'm here. I know it. I know every map of African country. Because you cannot be a teacher and you fail to do that, to know those things. The whole part of northern Nigeria, it is almost lawless. There's a lot of insecurity, most of the Sahara region. But who are the people entering the army? The youth, who are recruited in the Boko Haram, in Al-Shabaab, in all these organizations, in Maghreb, in Al-Qaeda Maghreb, in ISIS, in Mozambique. Look at the whole continent. In Congo itself, where Madame Benedict, the younger sister of mine, it has rebels. Some of them originate from Uganda. They are there. They are there. And the African Union has been singing, writing documents. We want you to lay down your arms. They have not put there any mechanisms of reducing the rebel groups. They have encouraged, if you are going to write all the papers to a rebel group which has got arms, which has got money, let me ask you, has the African Union, my sister and brother in the studio, and my fellow panelists, has African Union protested to Saudi Arabia why Al-Shabaab wears the same uniform that Saudi Arabian army wears? I leave a question to you. Ask your panel later on. Al-Shabaab wears that uniform you see. Is the uniform of Saudi Arabia army. Where do they get it? Can't the African Union summon? But I see the African Union chairperson being called every day. He's being called every day into Saudi Arabia to have dinner. But he has never asked where these uniforms come from that come to kill us. They come to kill people in Kenya and Uganda and the whole Africa. Boko Haram is having uniforms. If you look at the uniforms of Boko Haram, and new guns and the new uniforms, where do they get these new uniforms? Somebody is supplying them. But has the African Union come to our rescue? Look at the conflict in the dam. There is this dam conflict between Ethiopia and Egypt. The African Union has failed even to sit down and negotiate terms for Ethiopia not to fill the water so that Egypt does not starve. They can't solve one problem. This is not an organization. Younger people, I'm sorry, we have let you down. We have let you down because of one man who has actually turned a blind eye, who doesn't want to be given advice. The heads of state, I don't know those who are going to go there on the 5th, but you will soon see my letter advising the heads of state not to go to Addis Ababa because they risk quite a lot of things. The rebels are in the nearby. They could be in the building and the rebels strike. Yes, and that is I am telling you, as a security expert also, the rebels will come and strike. We don't want our presidents to be in chaos in Ethiopia. So they rather stay on Zoom and do on stream to Addis Ababa, not to go into Addis Ababa. Because there is no AU, it has not helped us, it has taken the money. Can you be shocked? Can I shock you again? The soldiers in AMISOM have not been paid for 10 months. Have you heard that? AMISOM soldiers, now you are talking of security. AMISOM soldier, a soldier who has not been paid is more dangerous than the one who is dead.
Dr. David, you bring up the AMISOM, you bring up security as well. I think it's an opportune time for us to look at the Silencing the Guns initiative that the African Union had brought up, and it was supposed to be silencing the guns by 2020, particularly looking at finding ways to direct or divert the angst and the energy of young Africans so that they did not end up becoming part of these terrorist organizations like you've listed out. But some have said that the guns have actually become louder, especially in the year and the years after Silencing the Guns came out. So have there been any initiatives you would consider successful by the African Union that have even had a moderate level of success? Is it Silencing the Guns? Give us your thoughts on that.
There is nothing, no gun has a side. Where? Show me. More guns are coming out. I'm telling you, by the end of this year, there will be about 6 schools in that Sahel region. I've seen. I'm a member of the International Institute of Strategic Studies, a life member, and a life member of Chatham House. We see the intelligence comes, we know which country is heading towards a military situation. We see it, we get the reports. But I'm telling you, African Union, apart from the Security Committee that is headed by Kenya now, Kenya has tried. For example, President Uhuru Kenyatta here has tried to solve a problem between Salva Kiir and Riek Machar of South Sudan. He has now silenced, we are nearing, and I want to thank President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta for being silent diplomats, following some of the strategies that people elsewhere have used. The gun is in Ethiopia between Tigray and the Ethiopian government are going to come down. The signing of these agreements are soon coming. At least that one, we have a way forward. That is okay. But the rest of these other parts, African Union has no clue. Look at the war in Mozambique. It had no clue. There is radicalization of the youth. Where is the program of the youth from African Union? You have a youth and a women department taking over $50 million per year. $50 million. But if you ask anybody in some of these African countries whether AU has ever visited their country, a delegation coming from AU saying they want to know the problems of the youth, they haven't. They haven't. So African Union has created more chaos, more confusion than creating avenues of resolving conflicts on this continent. We can't resolve even our village meeting conference. We can't. We have failed, and let the African Union chairperson admit he has failed. If he was a honorable man, he would resign and allow a reformation, a rebranding, a revamping of this organization to a workable solution, a workable way direction. Otherwise, my sisters and brothers, there is no solution. We are having more wars as we speak now. Yesterday, Rwanda and Uganda only opened the border after 2 years. After 2 years, how much business have we lost in Kenya? How much business have we lost in Uganda? How much business have we lost in Rwanda? After 2 years, the border was closed, and African Union could not negotiate anything between Rwanda and the Uganda. Surely you call it African Union? Is that African Union? No, that is African disunity. There is no African Union. For me, it is just a label, AU, with a green flag. But the real things are on paper. There is no practical thing happening in African Union. Okay. If you are waiting for it to help you, you better help yourself first.
All right, you've spoken a lot. Talk about Dr. David. Let's go to Benedict. Benedict, let's look at the recent coup that has taken place as well. We've seen that take place in Mali, Guinea, and just recently we also saw that in Burkina Faso. Being widely read, and also looking at the fact that you have also been able to travel around Africa, how would you say the recent coup that's happening under the nose of the African Union is rightly affecting youths in Africa?
Yeah. I think I'm coming back again about what doctors say. I think there are many conflicts that we have in Africa. It comes from many generations. So I know we are talking about many conflicts, but many conflicts, it doesn't come from this generation. It comes from many generations' story. Before we start to solve those problems, we need to understand the story behind those problems, because now we are trying to fight the problems, but we are not trying to fight the problems behind. Because there is one fact that I give an example, DRC and Rwanda. We have been in many conflicts since generation to generation. And those presidents, when they will go in African Union, they pretend to be in the same level, but in their country and in those presidents, there are many stories behind, there are many problems behind that will go generation to generation. So before we start to resolve those problems, we need to understand the story behind and then discuss about the story behind instead of faking the collaboration between many countries that it even not exists. And in the other country, like we see in many when I travel in many countries, I see there are young people that are trying to organize the peace activities, trying to find solutions to the peace event, but still there is story behind that we need to solve before we start solving the problems. So we need to touch the main problems before we start saying to young people, you need to stop guns, you need to do this, you need to do this. This is okay, but the story starts behind, it's very heavy, and then it goes generation to generation. And this is starting to become hard to resolve those problems.
So Benedict, I want to stay with you. As a young African in 2022, is the AU relevant to you? Is it relevant to the stability of your country, the economic progress of the region, possibly calling your president to order for human rights violations, as we've seen across the continent in many ways? Is the African Union relevant to young Africans such as yourself? Does it still have a future here on the continent with young Africans?
On my side, I see there is many theory. Like we read many papers, there are many resolutions that is taking place. But in action, actually, I can't see the action points. For me, we need to go more in action than in many decisions and the theory that we are taking. In 2022, what I want to see more in African Union, it's more action than theory. Because most of people that I know who work in, who have an organization that collaborates with African Union, they come together and they talk about resolution, they talk about terrorism, but we need more action. So those actions, like when we talk about peace, we can see that the peace is coming together. When we talk about supporting young entrepreneurs, we can see how the young entrepreneurs are growing their business. So we cannot just talk about theory instead of not having practice. So for me, since I'm here, for me, I can just see those theory that they're putting together, those papers that they are writing, but I need more action. The action that we can see, the action that young people can see, okay, African Union, it's more relevant now for us.
All right, Dr. David, thank you so much, Benedict, for those points. Let's look at an aspect here. Let's look at autocracy. But don't you think this is also giving the AU a problem in ensuring that Africa's problems are indeed tackled headlong?
Yes, leaders in Africa, I believe you talked about autocracy.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Oh my God, that is one of the few things. You notice that every leader in Africa now wants to change the constitution. Where you are, if my good friend, Major General Buhari, or General Buhari, had more years, he would change the constitution to remain there. In most of the African countries, the constitutions have been changed. What is creating the coups now? Conde. You saw Mr. Conde being overthrown by his own aide-de-camp. He changed the constitution. Ouattara changed his age. You know, some people are even changing age in Africa. This is the Africa we have, I'm telling you. People are changing age. Ouattara said he's about to reach 75, where he said the constitution of Côte d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, I don't know about Côte d'Ivoire, because I don't like French. Look, Ivory Coast, he changes the constitution, term limit, and age limit. Do you not see that every president in Africa is trying to go closer to removing those things? Why? Why? And that is the main cause. That is what African Union should tackle now. Why are African presidents changing constitutions which result into military coups? Look at all the elections where coups have taken place. Burkina Faso, Ouattara, that gentleman there. No, I think that is not Ouattara, that is Idriss.
Idriss.
Is it Idriss or Ouattara? No, that's
Ouattara.
Ouattara, yes.
Yeah.
That is Mr. Ouattara. Ouattara was very helpful when I was in Abidjan. Now look, he's changing the constitution to remain there under those conditions. Look at the gentleman in Cameroon, Paul Biya, 42 years in power. And the insecurity is there. In fact, for me, AFCOM, I am very embarrassed as an African. And when AFCOM starts, I switch off.
Why? Why is that?
Because I hate, one, they are playing near Yaoundé and the other capital, when rebels are just very near each other. There, Amazonians are dying. For years, we have been telling Mr. Paul Biya, he doesn't even live in Cameroon. He just came from abroad to open the markets of our football. I cannot attend such. I want the younger generation, like this lady here, to learn from some of us. I'm not an NGO for anybody to pay me, but I'm an activist, international activist. I've read the books, but I'm an activist. You don't touch anything which is anti-African, and I leave you. I will work against you. So, if you look at all this, African Union should first tame the autocracy of some of the presidents. And say, if you are changing your constitution to stay in power, don't come to AU.
Okay.
Yes, we checked out Morocco. Morocco stayed 40 years, about 30 years without coming. Were we dying? Were we dying? No, we should have the teeth to bite. So many African heads of state are changing the constitution today in order to stay in power. What caused the war in Ethiopia? The man came and changed, sacked all Tigray people from high positions, threw them out. What do you expect? A conflict. What has happened in DRC Congo? Today in Congo, there are people who are living on borrowed time because they don't know whether Tshisekedi is going to be stable. Tshisekedi has invited in Uganda and other countries to help him. So some of these countries in Africa, to stop insecurity, you need to rearrange them. Have you heard my word?
We've heard you, Dr. David. Thank you so very much.
There are some countries in Africa that need rearrangement. We better start rearranging them so that we take infrastructure there. We Ugandans, we come for you. We come for you if you touch us again. Kivuna knows we have gone in Congo, we are now there. In fact, we have dismantled the rebel groups. We are beating them, we are killing them there. We have no mercy. We are not going to wait. No, wait for us. My sister, I know you are going to say.
I need to give Benedict to share her final thoughts because of time.
That is our motto. Our motto, you touch our people, we come for you. We are Israel of Africa.
All right, Dr. David, let's leave it at that. Benedict, I'd like you to share your final thoughts. The AU is present. It's, of course, coming out of the OAU, the Organization of African Unity, but obviously is not living up to many people's ideals of what the African Union should be. You've heard from Dr. David. He's predicting at least 6 more coups on the continent this year. We're seeing a massive immigration of young Africans running from their countries. We're seeing poverty, unemployment, and at the end of the day, young Africans are starting to turn on their governments and they're dissatisfied. Where do you see the AU being able to step in the next 5, 6, 7, 8 years? And let's do this in 1 minute if you can, Benedict.
The first part is like create the communication between the decision and the young people. I know there is many platforms where you can find information, but I think we need to solve the gap between African Union and young people. So this gap of information, we really need to solve that so young people can be aware about what's happening, and then they can give their ideas, they can give what they think, they can propose things. And also for the peace part, we need to create peace between those countries. But this peace will not stay something in theory or things that is written. We need to go in the practice. In the practice part, there is this infrastructure that young Congolese can easily go to South Africa, can easily go to another country. This way of change, going to many countries, create that affection on those countries, that love on those countries, that these young people, they will be more Africans than just trying to find solution for their country, but they will be more close with those other countries. For me, on my side, I can conclude that we need to solve the gap between what's happening in the African Union to young people, so young people can have a platform where they can not just give their ideas, but they can be involved about what the resolution is taken, and then they can like own it, and then starting to build on that resolutions.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much, Benedict, for being here with us for this second hour as we've taken a look at the commemoration of the African Union at 20. Thank you, and thank you for being here. We also want to say thank you to Dr. David. You've spoken tough once again as we've looked at
my sisters, thank you. God bless you. There is no African Union. It is dead. It is rented to the French. There is no African Union.
Thank you.
All right, Dr. David.
Thank you, Dr. David. Well, it's been a fantastic one here. News Central special broadcast, taking a look at the African Union at 20. The ups and downs, the highs and lows, not forgetting to Tolu. We've taken a look at some of the challenges, and it's got to do from the regional blocks, over to autocracy, over to political instability, infrastructural deficit, name it, and the likes.
And it has been 20 years that the Durban Summit established the African Union, and nearly about 70 years since the establishment of the Organization for African Unity. Now, in that time, Africa has witnessed growth. We've moved people out of poverty. We've also seen technological advancements, but not to the level that we all want. And as we look at 20 years of the African Union, the question of the present and the future remains. How much relevance does the African Union have for the youngest continent in the world? How much relevance does it have if its leaders are not ready to be held accountable? It's not a conversation that's going to stop. We know that in February, the heads of states and governments will be meeting. And of course, we're going to hear a lot more in regards to that. So that is where we'll be wrapping things up today. 20 years of the African Union. You can reach out to us on social media at News Central TV. Let us know your thoughts, what you think of the AU. Does it still have a place on the continent and in the hearts of Africans?
Thank you so much for watching, and our programming continues. I'm Joe Hanson.
I'm Tolu Lakwe Adela Rubalogun. Do stay with News Central, where we put Africa first.